Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association's Antitrust Law section. Today's topic is, how do I build practical tips for extending your network? My name is John Roberti. One of the great things about the legal profession is that we all benefit by what we call network effects, which means the more people we know, the more people we touch, the more effective we are. And that comes into play because you can, through these network effects, you can gain knowledge, you can build relationships, you can have opportunities to collaborate and work with others. If you're in private practice, you have opportunities perhaps to even generate business and be more profitable. Today, we are going to talk with an expert about how particularly young lawyers should think about building those networks, some practical tips to maximize those network effects in your legal practice. My co-host today is Deona Kalala. Hi, Deona.
Hi, John.
Deona, what are we going to be talking about today?
So as you mentioned, today we're covering organic networking, how to make and keep great connections.
Great. And who is our guest?
Our guest today is Karen Wickery. She's the author of Taking the Work Out of Networking, Your Guide to Making and Keeping Great Connections. And
what are we hoping to get out of the conversation today?
Well, for all of us busy antitrust professionals, the key points that we want to learn are the value of networking, the best places to start, and how to make it easy.
What are, in your own practice, in your own world, how is it that you use networking, in your daily law practice?
Well, for me personally, it's a multi-pronged approach. You've got your in-person networking, which I rely heavily on the antitrust section for, where I get to meet a lot of different professionals in different fields and to have the opportunity to exercise some of my skills within the section as well. But then I also rely on social media like LinkedIn and Instagram to share a bit of my personal opinion and professional experience.
All right, well, let's learn more. Let's bring in our guests. Karen Wickery, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here, Karen. So my very first question to you, it's 5 p.m. on a Friday, and I just got a reminder email from someone at the ABA asking me to come to the antitrust section event that I had just signed up for. Should I go?
My rule of thumb is no event should be on a Friday at 5 p.m. But if they are, and if this is something you presumably signed up for because you thought would be of value, I would go with very, realistic expectations. You're not going to meet everyone at the event. It's not a place to seal a deal. It is a place to do a little meet and greet and maybe have come away with one or two contacts that you follow up with later. So, and that's on the basis of simply a good feeling and a little moment of what seemed to you to be interesting conversation. So again, you're not diving deep into the legal weeds with people. You're not nerding out for a long time, but you're having enough of an exchange to say, can I follow up with you? Could I have your contact info? Because I'd like to know more. I'd like to talk to you further. That's it. If you do that and can get out within an hour, it's a big win.
Yeah, and I really like the way that you explain that because it's, in a way, taking the pressure off of going to networking events where you feel like you have to be on the entire time.
Yeah, most people, I think, hate the notion of networking because the setup in our minds is always, I'm one person and I have questions or I need something or I got to scramble to find a new job or a new contact or something. And there's this faceless mass of people out there and I have to somehow penetrate them. And they have all the answers and know everything. And it's just me on the other side. The fact is everybody is thinking that, and that is why we hate these networking events. But also it's never you versus a group. It's always going to be some one-to-one connection that you make, and again, the all-important follow-up with. So that's really the better way to think about it than, I got to know everybody and I got to, make every contact. You don't. You won't, and you don't.
Right. It's impossible. So let's say, because of your general rule that we all know it shouldn't have been at 5 p.m. on a Friday, and so we can't make it, you talk a lot about organic networking and different ways of keeping in touch with people. What's the next best alternative if it's not the face-to-face interactions?
Well, so there's two parts to this. For people, first of all, you have a network already, probably bigger than you realize, simply because you have contacts from your educational past. You have contacts from different jobs where you've worked, not only including legal profession jobs. And so there are more people to call on with whom you've had some contact and who you know slightly, who you may know well but aren't in touch with anymore. We'll come back to that and how you stay in touch with them. And the other part of it is, you get introduced to people along the way. And here again, you may have very pleasant contacts that are not ultimately that memorable, but in the moment. But it's someone who works at a firm that does interesting work. It's someone who has a specialty that you're following, that you want to know more about, you want to learn about. These are the kind of people that can also be in your network and with whom you're in occasional touch. So whether you know them well or you get introduced along the way or make an introduction yourself to someone you'd like to, the key is not a magic number of people, but people who have some relevance to what you're doing or want to do. And then having established some kind of contact, and it could be an email introduction, it could be you writing to someone whose articles you've been enjoying, that kind of thing. Then it's a matter of the follow-up and the keeping in touch with afterwards, not when you have a need, not always when you have a question, but simply to say, I saw something else you wrote, I really like that. I saw this article and I wondered what you thought of that. I hope you're well. That kind of keeping in touch so that you have some intermittent contact and can turn to that person when you have a more specific need. And by the way, they may do the same with you. This is not a one-way street.
Mm-hmm. So what's the best way to manage that process? I know for me, a lot of days when I wake up, I have 50,000 things on my plate. And honestly, networking can fall to the bottom of that list. And so how do you make that process of the follow-up with those networks that you already have and these new people that you're trying to build relationships with? How do you make that process work?
I'm on one end of the spectrum, which is sort of who comes to mind, and therefore who do I see something that reminds me of someone in the moment, and I do this, and then I just simply follow up immediately. And oftentimes for me, I do scan Twitter all the time and read a lot through Twitter. So where I'm connected to someone already, I will simply forward that tweet, which is typically an article, and say, thinking of you, hope you saw this, let's catch up soon. Something that doesn't require an immediate response. It's something that isn't a specific ask. But there are other people at the other end who have like elaborate CRMs set up for their own, like managing all their contacts. And so it's really whatever suits. It might be that you keep kind of a running list of, just reminders of, though, these are people based on what I'm doing now, I'd like to get in touch with, or I have a specific question for. I just met someone who does an interesting. He just keeps a spreadsheet, and he basically it's sort of, here are people I want to stay in touch with, and then he enters basically the last time he was in touch with them, and he looks at it and says, "Oh, I want to just say hello again," and send them something, give them something, so that it's not I'm here empty-handed asking you. So there are all kinds of ways, and I'm sure people in the legal profession may have some interesting software tools. There are many and many of these out here that are a combination of contacts or Salesforce or whatever. The main thing I say is build it in as a kind of daily habit where you're in contact with 2 or 3 people, just for the briefest of hello, thinking of you, would love to see you soon. How are you? Can we schedule a phone date sometime? Something like that you simply send off, and they don't have a time limit on them, and they're just meant to be kind of a touch point. If you do that as a kind of constant kind of habit, as I say, then you will get responses along the way. And then someone will say, "Oh, I'm glad you wrote me because I also want to talk to you about such and such, or I want to hear what you've been doing." So it's just a matter of sort of planting the seeds out there and keeping that up.
It's really interesting that you phrase it that way. I used to be in sales, and so I was definitely on the CRM side of the spectrum, where I had my contact, their contact information, fields for each tidbit that I knew about them, like where they went to school, how many kids they had, and whatnot.
Right.
But what you've described, just sending a short email that says, "Hey, how are you?" Sounds like it might be a lot more manageable than the CRM side of things.
Yeah, unless you're really adept at that, that's fine. Some people do like that for keeping track. But just to say, literally, I mean, sometimes I know I have friends who I know follow certain sports teams, and even though I don't, I'm kind of aware enough of the news to say, congrats about your team, or sorry about your team, whatever happened last night. Or, something big in the news about an industry or a company that I know involves that person. I just say, wonder what you think about this, or I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hope you're well. And that's it. Again, a little different than I really need something specific from you. Can I make a time for us to talk? That's also legitimate. It wouldn't probably happen as often as this more casual, keeping in loose touch.
So I'd like to switch gears with you for a second and talk about social media, the platforms we love to hate.
Yeah.
And, there's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and, a myriad of other platforms that people can choose to share their personal and professional information. And in your book, you talk a bit about blending your personal and your professional persona and how and why that's important. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I want to call that out because whether we like it or not, we are living in a time where many of us are more comfortable with some degree of sharing, right? Of here's pictures from my vacation. We just got a new dog, meet the baby. Many of us are doing that to some degree on whatever our chosen platforms are. I would say, and not just us, it's much more common now. We see it in political candidates. We see it in corporate executives. People are kind of showing a little bit more of themselves. We know that Tim Cook is a big Alabama fan, for example. It's become more of a norm to have a bit more well-rounded or kind of human view of all kinds of people. And none of us is exempt from that unless we just have opted out of all of it. But I have to say, first of all, recruiters are scouring every platform for everybody all the time because they want to see if they've got a name of a prospective candidate or someone is already in the mix. They want to know what they're saying and and doing. And we could argue how much is too much in terms of companies looking into information. But the fact is, most of these platforms are not that hard to find the information, as we see in news stories every day. So I would just say it's fine. Choose the level of comfort you want for your personal sharing, and know that people are going to see it. But the other part of it I'm trying to stress is it's really okay, because frankly, in a way, I've worked in a lot of corporate environments where if somebody has no footprint, it's kind of weird. It's like, why don't they? Because the rest of us do. So I would say it's okay not to be too worried about the vacation pics and so on. It's kind of become a social norm to do some of that, again, within your control and what you want to choose. Now, about LinkedIn in particular, I would say this is the platform that is actually designed for essentially professional networking, right? So it's a little less personal, although we now are seeing, I think, a bit more personal interest coming into LinkedIn. But to its credit, it's kind of kept this focus, and it's the most legitimate place for people to talk about their interest and their careers and their aspirations. And also, every recruiter and every screener is living on there all the time. And for many of the rest of us, it's kind of a de facto lookup for people. If somebody says to me, do you know so-and-so? And they're in, a business, it's someone in a professional capacity, I immediately turn to LinkedIn to see who am I connected in some way? Who is this person? Where have they been? Etc. So it's just about a required thing. It's also how when you're applying for jobs, oftentimes people will say these days, the resume may be optional, but the LinkedIn profile is imperative, right? Send that in because it's just a link and it populates their forms, their application forms. So I would say that one is the safest and kind of the most professional of all of them. The others are more your choice and your interest. They're for different things, by the way. One does not have to be on all of them. One uses different ones in different ways. The biggest error I see often in media stories is conflating Twitter and Facebook, and they're very different platforms with very different uses. Twitter is designed to be public, so it is more about opinion and commentary and conversation. We think of it as being overwhelmed these days by political news and so on, but Twitter's entirely a function of who you follow. So your experience may be very different than someone else's. If you wanted nothing but puppies and kittens on your Twitter account, you'd have a very delightful, fun experience every day that would have nothing to do with the larger world. But people forget that because so much gets amplified in the news that has happened on Twitter. But for your own personal experience, I think it's a great tool for people who are following news events, business, and so on, partly because many, many reporters rely on it. It's a tool for them. So I'm a news hound, and I kind of see first what's happening on Twitter as, oh, that's news I want to follow. That's a story I want to follow. But again, optional. Facebook was not designed for really anything on the professional side. They would like it to be, but it was really more about friends and family. So not that you can do more. You can ask your friends about leads for jobs, but I would say success will be limited on Facebook simply because it's meant to be more personal. I would say Instagram is largely also meant to be personal, but it is a fun place for people to kind of have their passions show. Like you mentioned, you use Instagram.
Right. Yeah. And when I use Instagram, it's typically sharing my professional accomplishments with friends, and so it's more intended in that way than expanding my professional network. But that does lead me to an interesting question. So, I know there are lots of people out there who do social media as a job, and they have very carefully curated social media profiles. But I think while that's not possible for the majority of people, I think there is some benefit to curating your profile, particularly in the legal profession, to demonstrate an expertise that you might have or want the world to know that you're developing. Particularly as young lawyers, how do you demonstrate that expertise on your LinkedIn page, for example?
Well, so LinkedIn is an interesting canvas because, and a good one, I think, for people who are coming up and gaining expertise. First of all, the top part of the sort of open text field is called a summary on LinkedIn. And that is a place not to recount your jobs that are going to appear in the chronology below. Anyway, it's a place to say, I'm pursuing, my field of interest is X. I'm pursuing this area. I'm especially interested in, a certain legal topics or certain policy issues, and something broader. And I'd like to, we used to say, and I want a job in so-and-so company or field. You don't have to be that specific, but you can paint sort of a broader picture of your kind of aspirations vocationally, right? And to say, my passion is this, helping clients, resolve this kind of issue, or helping to explain and defend, certain policy positions, that kind of thing. It can be broader. And then down below, you can mention, either any kind of recognition or something like that. But you don't have to recount every job, because that's what you're going to do below. And then the other thing I'd say is in your job listings where LinkedIn would like chronology, you can combine several roles or break them out as you like, depending on, it was one firm, but here are 3 positions I had. But then go ahead and detail a little bit about each one. Don't just list the title and the dates. Say a little bit more in real language about, I took the team, or we had a team on this kind of case, and we did this. We were able to do that. And I realize legally, you may not want to or be able to detail a lot, but paint a picture for a more for a reader who's wanting kind of the gist of the thing, even if you can't cite any particulars. And and by the way, non-legal jobs can also fit into this. If you had a prior career or experience that had to do with project management, for example, or business development, or something else entirely, use those, and maybe it was even a series of internships or shorter jobs. You could roll those up and not have item by item for each job, but just say, I also, under this period of time, did these things that showed my ability to manage projects of this size or this complexity or something like that. Because at the end of the day, and at some point later, you're not going to want to list every job you've ever had, but you will want to highlight the skills and what you've learned in a variety of settings.
So Karen, I had a question for you. As you work with younger professionals, particularly younger lawyers, what are some of the biggest lost opportunities or biggest mistakes that you see in how those folks go about in their approach to networking?
I think the biggest one is not being sort of broad enough in your thinking about who might be interesting to meet or might be helpful. So sometimes people get overly literal and say, well, right now I'm in this job, I'm doing this kind of law, I'm doing this kind of work day to day. I don't have time to meet someone who's not directly in, my field of vision. And you don't know where that contact might have led. I'm not saying you have to overschedule a lot of meals or even coffee dates, but there may be a value that you're not going to know unless you have some passing contact with a person, especially if it's someone you know is saying, I think you should meet this person, or I know this person who does this. I would say that your default should be, yes, I'd like to. Maybe not this week. Maybe introduce me and we'll make a time for next month to have a phone call or something like that. You don't box in your time, but be more open-minded about the kinds of people that you might meet, and be curious about people that are kind of serendipitous that you come across. Because I find people kind of, if they get too narrow with their definition, it can hamper, for example, a job search, or it can hamper, someone is actually looking for people to be on an ABA committee or to be a panelist at an upcoming conference. And if you say, like, I just don't see, other than my day-to-day, this isn't relevant to me, you may be losing opportunities.
What about frustration? You talked about planting seeds, and I have the sense that you have to plant 100 or 1,000 before you really see a lot of plants to grow. What do you tell people about sticking with it and resilience?
I think there's a great quote from a guy named Ivan Meisner that I use in my book, which is, networking is less about hunting and more about farming. So it's planting seeds is apt. I would say if you're not a farmer, think about gardening. But the same idea, you're tending to the garden and you're cultivating it, but it's not all day, every day. And which farming might be, come to think of it. But the difference is hunting is very transactional, right? Where this gardening metaphor is nice because, yes, you're planting seeds and you're watering. And by the way, sometimes you're weeding and sometimes you're, digging, plowing up something and planting something new. But the idea is it's ongoing and you'll see what comes of it. And sometimes that's surprising. But if you make a bit of a daily habit of just being, oh, I'd like to meet that person, or, go ahead, introduce me. Partly when people ask me that, I say, well, if I'm happy to talk to that person, but it could be very brief because I will quickly realize I'm not the right one. I don't have that information. They want something sort of that's asking too much of my time. That's sort of off the point. I can make that a very quick conversation and steer them, elsewhere. So I would say I'd rather have some of those seeds, not yield, than to be too narrow, because again, you just don't know what might come from serendipity. Well, one more thing I will say. I just was invited to give a talk at an event in Spokane. I was invited by someone I met 15 years ago and had not seen in 10 years when he was in a different city, a different location, a different job. The person I suggested joined me on stage for a conversation that turned out to be very successful. I'd met once in life, again about 15 years ago. I just corresponded with her to ask her about this. She said, yes, I remember you. I'd like to do this. And it was a fantastic event and a fantastic evening. So you just don't know. These are not people I knew well. And it worked out beautifully because we had some relevant past contact.
Well, so this is really helpful. And we want to ask a couple of questions so listeners can learn a little bit more about you. But before we do that, could you tell us the name of your book and where we might be able to find it if we're interested in it?
Yeah, it's called Taking the Work Out of Networking. The paperback is just out. The subtitle is Your Guide to Making and Keeping Great Connections. It is, of course, on Amazon. It's published by Simon & Schuster. And there's an audio version read by yours truly, which was very fun to do. So it is available in all formats.
Terrific. All right. Well, Karen, our listeners would like to maybe learn a little bit more about you. Tell us, what do you like about what you do? What do you like about your job?
Well, so at this point, I'm a consultant, and I consult on communications matters and editorial strategy for companies. And that comes out of my many years of doing that in and around Silicon Valley. I've been a long-time writer and editor, and I've worked for big companies and small. The big ones had a long run at Google, had a 5-year run at Twitter after that. Many startups that are since gone one way or the other, and some old line companies as well, all in and around Silicon Valley. So what I love about what I do is the need for what we today call content has never stopped. People read, people write, people need clearer language in every instance, and that is not going to be automated anytime soon. So I do love that. I love kind of solving problems with people about what they want to say, how they want to say it, to which audience.
And tell us something surprising or unusual about yourself that we wouldn't know if we only knew you professionally.
Among the many things I could pick from, but I'm on the verge of adopting a new dog. So I'm a big fan of pit bulls and pit bull mixes, and I'm I believe about to get my third in a line of these from a rescue group, of course.
The much maligned pit bull.
Yes, exactly.
Well, good. Well, now we're going to go to our final segment, which we call The Curious Hat.
And now it's time for The Curious Hat.
The Curious Hat involves me picking an actual question out of an actual hat. And I am going to ask Karen to choose a number between 1 and 25, and I will ask the question that corresponds with that number.
17.
Okay, question number 17. What was your favorite course in college?
Something called American Studies.
And what was that about?
It's a combination of history and literature.
How'd you do?
I did well. Got 2 degrees in that field.
Well,
that's a plug for the humanities, by the way.
And with that, thank you, listeners. We will see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.